Hi, everyone. Suddenly nervous. It's really exciting to have you here in my little home studio in northern British Columbia. I often think of Opus as my local art supply store, although the nearest Opus to me is a full day's drive. But it's in my own province, and it's where I go when I want to be inspired by supplies. And that is a big part of my artistic practice, is bringing in new tools, new toys to help kind of liven up my watercolor. And that's important to me because I believe that playful art is really inspired art. It's creative. When we get playful, we tend to be a little more free. We want to bend the rules. We want to see just how far we can go and what we can get away with. And so bringing in anything that helps me feel more playful is really helpful to supporting my art practice. In fact, I would say it's one of the most important things that I do as an artist. And it's funny because sometimes when I come to play, I can feel like I'm just going through the motions. I'm pretending to play, but I still feel all kind of bound up inside, wanting to make a perfect painting. There's an inner me that got well trained as a rule follower as a child growing up. You know, if you follow the rules, if you're a good little girl, things tend to go well for you. And I've had to unlearn that as an artist in wanting to make my most authentic art. And so I come to my art studio practice with all of these kind of thoughts and mindsets and struggles. And I want to make authentic work. I want to make art that represents who I am, but I don't always know who that is. And that's why I think it's so important for me to open my watercolor up to play, to be willing to experiment and to let myself discover, who I am and where I'm going. And so I come to my painting practice with a whole bunch of question marks. And if you're painting in watercolor, you come to your paintings with question marks too. You're going to be asking yourself, how the heck do I paint the thing I want to paint? How do I get the idea in my head out onto paper? And in that process, there's all kinds of experiences and emotions that come with the painting process. And especially when we start painting and the painting's not going the way we expect. And so I want to talk about and demonstrate some ways to learn how to adapt your plan so that painting stops being about you needing to be right, needing to be in control, and it becomes much more relational. And, that's actually the first principle I want to share with you. We're going to just switch over to my work surface, is that watercolor is relational and watercolor wants to be beautiful. Those are two things that I believe about watercolor, and we're going to explore them today. I have a couple of reference photos just to show you where I'm coming from. This is actually a couple weeks ago here in northern British Columbia because we had a dump of snow last weekend and we now have 8 inches of snow covering all of this beauty. But this is where I spend a lot of time just hiking and exploring on the trails behind my house. And I can walk out from my backyard up this trail. It's kind of a steep climb, but my dog and I like to do it a couple times a week. And there's miles and miles of wild country back there that we can explore. And it's absolutely beautiful in the autumn. I could be inspired by these colors all year round. And so I want to play with these colors today in my painting. And I'm going to be thinking very loosely of this photograph as I play with watercolor today and demonstrate how I can make watercolor my playground in exploring this subject. I'm also going to be working with the supply list that you saw when you signed up for this event. And you may be unfamiliar with the paper that I'm using. I found it at Opus when I was there in the summer in August, and was intrigued to try this Italian watercolor paper, Magnani 1404. It's 100% cotton watercolor paper, which is very important to me because 100% cotton paper really likes watercolor. It wants to flow. And so I get a better result when I play on 100% cotton paper. So I have a couple of these blocks here. This one's a heavier weight 300-pound paper, but I believe both of these are cold press. Actually, that's not true. This one's rough, this one's cold press. So I have some different textures to play with as well. And rough is just a little bit more rough textured than the cold pressed paper. So I'll be working with that paper. Feel free to paint along with whatever you have. Although again, I recommend 100% cotton. I'm going to be primarily using Daniel Smith watercolor today. Not every color in this palette is Daniel Smith. I have about 64 colors in this palette. And I have some Daniel Smith gouache as well. And I'll try to mention the colors that I use as I'm using them. Because if you like color the way I do, you'll find that no palette is large enough to contain all the hues you want to try. And I'm also working with these Caran d'Ache Neocolor 2 crayons. And these are a fairly recent discovery for me, and you can buy them in sets, but what I like to do is just fill my fists with them when I go to the art supply store, try a bunch of new colors. So I've been buying them individually. The Neocolor 2 are water soluble. It says it's a water soluble wax pastel, and it's important to me that it's water soluble so I can play with it in conjunction with my watercolor and see it dissolve a little bit on the paper. So I'll be grabbing a few of those as we paint today. I like to have some different mark making tools, many different sizes of brushes. You can see just a couple here. This is a big flat sketching pencil that I really like the wide lead and the fact that I can vary the width of my lines, which is important to me as well. Because I'm a watercolor painter, I've grown up with a brush in my hand. Since I started painting as a teenager, it's been nearly 30 years. And so to me, I love what a paintbrush does. The fact that you can press a brush down and get a wide or thin line, depending on how much pressure you put, that's important to me. And so when I started using pencils in the last couple of years, I'm going about this all backwards. I know most of us start drawing first and then paint. But when I started using pencils again, I loved the idea that I could have a pencil with this varied width, and I could make both wide and skinny lines with one tool, just the way I've always done with my paintbrush. So that's a little bit of an introduction to supplies. I want to start by just doing a bit of an underpainting. And this is probably something you're familiar with. We're going to paint a little bit wet on wet and just explore the subject again of this little landscape. And I want to think about this landscape as having several different elements. I'm just going to show them to you. We've got our golden leafed trees in this area here. We've got this beautiful band of golden kind of grasses over here. We've got sky that's filling the kind of upper 2/3 of the page. And then we've got all of the trees that are in here, these gray or stark black branches, this dark kind of path that's coming down through the middle. And so we can think about this scene as having kind of multiple pieces going on. All of these pieces are connected and they kind of overlap with each other. And as a painter, that's important to me. As I've painted for all of these years, more and more I'm realizing how much I love connection in the different things that I'm painting. I don't want every shape to be segregated. I want to know where those major shapes are, but I want to think about how they connect with each other too. And I'm definitely feeling a strong connection between the golden leaves up here and the grasses down here, which have a similar warmth. It was late enough in the fall when I took this photo that almost all the other trees had lost all their leaves. And so this little cluster was kind of the only one left that still was leafed out in that beautiful warm color. So let's just play with a big brush and get some paint on the page really rapidly. And I said I was going to paint wet and wet, but I tend to start on dry paper. And one of the prep things I do is I like to tilt my painting board. And this is the Magnani paper. I wanted to do this first layer, and then I've got to step out on the block. I'll show you in a minute. And so one thing I do is I like to have that little bit of an angle. So I'm just tilting on this little jar. So I have just 1.5 inches off the surface back here. That means I have gravity helping me with flow. And then the other thing I always do is I always moisten the paint in my palette with my spray bottle. And I've actually already done that. But misting the surface of my paint wakes up the surface of the paint, gives the water a chance to soak in so I can get a richer consistency of paint with my brush. I'm going to moisten my brush and just take off a little excess water so it's loaded with water but not dripping. And I'm going to grab a beautiful warm yellow gold red gold. This is Aussie red gold, and it is a red gold. Look at that. So there we've just painted that clump of trees. I isolated it as kind of that blob in the center of the page. And we're going to just connect that with the grasses down below. And let's add another interesting yellow. Let's add some raw sienna, because the grass down below is a little bit earthier in color. And so now we have grass and we have leaves, the warm elements in our painting. And I want to think about connection. And generally the way I do that is with a spray bottle. And one of the ways I make watercolor my playground is I give it permission to play. I want the watercolor to know it's allowed to move, invite it to move and partner with me in making something beautiful. My brush can only do what I tell my brush to do, but when I add water, then the painting starts to do what the water wants it to do. And, gravity is involved in that, of flow, how much water I'm using, surface tension, all of those different elements start to take place. There's a lot of science happening in watercolor, even though we don't necessarily think about those scientific principles as we're painting. I'm just picking up some of my Daniel Smith lavender here, and I'm going to put some of that in to create that kind of grayish sky that I saw in the scene. And I'm kind of dancing around my trees, my yellow leaves here. And then I just pulled into it. I don't actually, there's how I handle my brush is going to impact how the color moves. If I pull out from the yellow, obviously that's going to bring the red gold across into the lavender, and I'm going to see a very muddy kind of lavender mixture. If I push into with the lavender, that actually is going to work a little bit better, keep my sky relatively clean. And then I can actually encourage it to mix a little bit with my spray bottle and just mist here. And I actually have 3 spray bottles at my table right now. This one is my big one that I use for wetting my paint, and it has so much force that I don't usually use it on my painting. I like to be able to direct the flow. This one kind of does a misty kind of effect. And I'm always hoarding spray bottles whenever I buy a product that comes in a spray bottle. I hang on to that bottle. And then this one has, can actually, depending on how I squeeze this little trigger, sometimes I get droplets coming out, bigger droplets that can create texture on my painting. And I'm not sure if you're seeing that, but there's little droplets, individual droplets, rather than the mist I would get from this. And that's giving me some leafy texture. So now I have what could be a great start for this painting. It really gets me my lighter values, my warm color, and my sky happening just like this. And I could walk away at this point, let it dry, and then come back and start to add some detail. But often in this stage of my painting, I like to start thinking about how I'm going to add impact and contrast. And I usually do that by adding dark values. Makes sense, right? And I'm looking for the dark value color I want to use. I kind of love how showy it is to be able to spin a palette and then just navigate to the color. Yeah, I'm showing off. This is a Bloodstone Genuine made by Daniel Smith, and I want to show you why I love this color. It's an earthy kind of dark, and it's very, very textural. So when I touch the Bloodstone on the page, and you can see my paper is damp, so now I'm getting a wet and wet effect. You can see how much it wants to move. First of all, we're getting a radiant movement of that pigment. And we have actually a dark, if we're squinting at this, we have a dark pattern that comes right across the page. So I'm going to kind of create that with my brush and my Bloodstone. And let's see, how far do I want to go with this? Do I want to put some tree trunks coming up? And I don't want to lose all my sky, so I got to leave some space for it, for the sky to peek through. But I can bring in some dark values right now. And what I have at this stage is no longer just an underpainting. You know, when I just had the orange and the lavender here, it felt like the beginning of a painting. But right now, what I almost see is an abstraction of this photo. I could stop right now and say, this is an abstract version of what I have here. And I kind of like that dynamic. I think that's kind of interesting. I can think if there's any elements that feel too strong, I could think about maybe encouraging that bloodstone to move a little bit and just walk it back. But I want you to notice that when I place that bloodstone genuine, it goes down on the page as almost a black. But as it sits on the paper, what I find is that it's really a textural color. It has a lot of sediment to it. And as that sediment sits on the paper, it tends to lose some of that dark value. And what we end up with instead is some really beautiful texture. And I just want to point that out, not necessarily to make you go run to shop for bloodstone, although it is a gorgeous color, but to encourage you to really notice what your pigment does as you're painting. Because so often we will put a color on the page and maybe it goes on too dark and we panic and blot it off right away. But if you're willing to pause and watch that color, maybe coax it to move a little bit, you'll start to see what characteristics it inherently carries with it. And those characteristics really help you to work with color more intuitively so that you're not just feeling like you're working with a new color every time. You actually start to have that kind of inner sense of what a color wants to do. And I'm gonna add a little third color here, fourth color, and that is a little bit of this rose of ultramarine. And that's a color I'm adding because, again, I've been working with these colors for a while. And so I know which colors really like to play with the red gold, with the lavender, and with the bloodstone, and which give me that feeling of fall that I want to portray. And bringing in this beautiful red violet, the rose of ultramarine, it just is such a beautiful color in this combination. It really helps the colors feel beautifully lively here in my painting. And I like that. I love that a lot. I'm just going to set this aside because I planned ahead for you, and I have another version that's similar to this that we're going to work on in this development process. As I think about making watercolor my playground, it feels it feels easy to play at this stage when things can be loose and the detail starts to come later. And it's that building in detail where we often tend to get a little bit lost. And maybe it starts to feel like a job or an obligation that we need to make our painting fit, fit some kind of idea in our head or match our photograph. And right now, you know, I could happily say this is an abstracted version of my photo. Maybe I don't need to do anything else, but there's a part of me that also wants to see, you know, how much further can I take this? And I think this idea of watercolor as a place to play includes the concept of going too far or going further than just, I've got something fresh that I like and I'm going to stop before I mess it up. Sometimes it's really helpful to keep going, to be willing to mess things up in the pursuit of how to develop a painting even further. So I'm going to set this aside, and my prepared one on the block, of course, is very different. There's not really, you know, that it's every time, it's different every time. And I love that. There's something very freeing about that. And something unpredictable about it too. And we can struggle with that. I want my painting to, I want to have guaranteed success every time I paint. And what I've learned is that every mistake that I've made has helped me develop strategies so that I can take something that isn't going the way I planned and maybe see new possibilities. And to me, that's what this idea of playing with watercolor, the greatest skill it's brought me, is that freedom to recognize I had an idea in my head, but I have so many more possibilities than just that idea. And so, you know, me choosing making a choice that doesn't match my original plan, it's not the end. There's a lot of freedom there. Okay, so what have we got here? Beautiful, large, warm shape here, warm shape down below here. We've got some different splotches of texture and color flowing across the page. You can see that that bloodstone has dried paler yet. And so we have some strong darks here, but they're not overpoweringly strong darks. And so I could decide I want to build up some of my dark values. I could think about now, though, how I want to tell a story with my little mess of color here. And I think that could be a lot of fun. So let's grab the pencil at this stage. And I love the fact that because I started painting with wanting to not draw, not wanting to do the planning that was involved in having a controlled sketch. Over time, I've learned that I can draw after I started painting and use my pencil as a tool for developing an existing painting, rather than feeling like I've made a drawing and now my entire now it's just a matter of filling in, paint by number, fill in the outlines. And so there's, I think I tend to use my pencil like a painter rather than as a controlled kind of outlined sketch. So right now I'm just going to kind of scribble, following those original shapes on the page. And I'm using the broad edge of the pencil lead and then turning it and angling it here and there. And I'm just thinking about, there's a massive shape here. I can kind of maybe draw around it. There's some trees kind of in front of our sky color, which has gotten very soft and muted. And maybe we want to develop this darkness of those dark trees against that lavender background. So that's something we could develop. I'm wondering about this as being kind of a dominant tree trunk, but then I was also wondering if maybe this should be a tree trunk and this should be a tree trunk. We could have two trees, which actually I kind of like that idea better. So maybe that's a tree and that's a tree. And yeah, we'll work with that. So then this yellow trickle down here becomes a part of maybe the background, a little mass of distant leaves, perhaps. And what I like about this, with this scribble with my pencil, is, and this very soft underpainting, there's not a lot of crisp lines at this stage. And that makes me feel like I can maybe stretch and pull this painting to fit what I have, rather than trying to fit it into the box that my photo says everything needs to be, in these different positions. My trees need to be a certain proportion. If I were to paint this just the way it was photographed, there's actually so much going on that I don't think it's ideal. I think, my attention when I was standing on location was fixed on these beautiful golden trees. But in this photograph, they really kind of blur into the rest of the trees in the scene. They don't have the impact that I want my painting to have. And I would like them to, kind of dominate even over this mass of grasses, which they're not really doing in my photograph. So this is where artistic license comes in, making the choice to say, I want my painting to be about this. I want this to support it. I want everything to kind of frame that. And we're gonna follow that idea until either it works out or it no longer serves us. So that's kind of the plan that I have at this stage. And with my little scribble lines in on the page, once again, kind of reminds me that I have freedom to use my painting to suit me. And I'm just going to keep kind of trying to illustrate that. Let's add a little more paint to the paper. Just breathe for a moment. And that's an important part of the process. Body language, breathing, how do I feel? Relax into this process. Notice what's in front of me. And that's hard to demonstrate in an online demo. I'm thinking about maybe trying to go a little bit darker with my sky right now. So I'm just thinking about maybe bringing in some of that lavender again in just kind of a few spots. What happens if I start to kind of trace around the tree with my lavender watercolor? And I like the way that darkening the lavender here made this yellow pop a little bit, but I'm not a big fan of the crisp line that I created here when I added this paint. So I'm gonna just do a little come and go here. And one thing I like to do at stage 2, after the first layer has dried, is when I bring in new colors at this kind of second layer stage, I often try to make it look as though the new color I'm adding is kind of a seamless fit into the painting. So I'll, instead of putting in maybe a crisp shape and just letting it sit on the page, I'll add that shape and then I'll look for ways to soften it. And maybe it's just using a damp brush to blend an edge. And sometimes it's actually grabbing, here where the lavender touches the gold tree color, I can bring in more of that gold color and let those two colors blend together, just the way they did in the first layer. And it gives me a little bit more of a seamless transition between the new color I've added and the previous color on the page. So I'm always looking for ways to kind of really create a natural feel so that, yeah, things just, you can't tell what happened when. And it's just all kind of, the painting is just emerging. And I want it to not be all about my hands having to make great decisions all the time. In addition to having lavender watercolor in my palette, I also have lavender gouache in this little sealed palette. And I don't have a lot of gouache hues. You can see I've got white and some 3 different blues. I've got a Cascade Green and Wisteria, and these are all from Daniel Smith. And this, I believe, is Venetian Red. So I don't have a huge range here, but I do, I can dive into the gouache. And if I feel like maybe I want a little more, less transparency from my sky color, I could go in and use the gouache. And the gouache is going to be less transparent, so it's going to cover a little bit better in my background. And a lot of times I'll use a gouache or a less transparent color to add detail over top of some darker colors, because you can take this gouache and use it to cover areas of your painting. So if I feel like this gold path right here is, too gold and I want sky there, I might be able to give that impression with a layer of gouache and just get some sky peeking through there. Yeah.
Quick question. Do you limit how many colors you would have in a painting?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do tend to, once I've chosen those first few colors, I really do try to stick within that range as much as possible. What usually happens, like right now, I feel like I have all the colors I need to make this painting work. I had the two warm colors, the red gold and the raw sienna. I brought in the Bloodstone as a darkest value color. The lavender gives me a pop of cool color, as does the red violet of the Rose of Ultramarine. So I do have just a handful of colors for this painting that makes it come to life. But I also I do like to break rules, and so just I don't say, okay, I won't add anything at this point. It's possible that I might find maybe my painting needs a pop of a teal blue for some reason, and then I could bring that in. So I'm always kind of trying to stick within a narrow range, but I never say never. Never's not a good fit for the way I paint. Let's bring in some more line. I'm hesitant to. I want some tree trunks to pop forward, but I'm a little bit hesitant to just start putting tree trunks, dark tree trunks in. And I'm not really sure why. So yeah, I'm just waiting to kind of feel that freedom. So while I'm waiting, I'm just going to play with this Neocolor crayon. Now this one is sepia color, which is kind of an earthy brownish gray. And it goes on the paper like a crayon. So the texture of this cold press paper means that I have a little rough line. And it's actually very similar to what the pencil was doing here a few minutes ago. So I'm going to just drag through. Actually, it also drags into the paint a little bit. So sometimes when you're working with a mark making tool like a crayon or a pencil, and you're working on wet paint, you get the added kind of bonus of seeing it drag some of the paint around, which I actually really love. And if you want to go a little bit darker with a crayon, a water soluble crayon, you can dip it in your paint water and you'll get a darker mark just because the crayon now is wet. So that water soluble effect is really starting to happen. And I'm just going to trace along the edge of this big tree trunk here on the right side. And maybe even pull up into the tree itself. We're just going to make that nice and dark with the crayon. And I think I'll do the same here, just on this side, just make a little dark shape. So suddenly I have now my kind of dominant trees kind of taking the shape a little bit on the page with this sepia crayon. And I tend to, one thing I like to do is, because it is a water soluble crayon, I like to mist my paper after I've worked with the crayon. And that'll soften that crayon mark that I've placed and it'll start dissolving a little bit. This one's really starting to dissolve. And it kind of melts that crayon into the paper. And I love that. We're getting the texture of the line, but we're getting some of that dissolving water soluble effect happening as well.
And Angela, a question about the neo colors. There's a couple
Mhm.
popping up here. Can you lift the neo colors? Is it an opaque watercolor paint, or would you say it's more transparent?
That is a tricky question. Actually, I feel like I use them mostly for mark making, so they create line for me. And so I'm not really sure how, like if you were trying to fill an area, that's when I would be thinking about them being, whether or not I could lift them, and how well they cover. I'll just show you, they are a bit opaque. This is a Sahara yellow. So if I'm working with the yellow, I can vary my pressure. I'm going to get kind of a consistency of that yellow on the page. It's not, I would say it's maybe a little more transparent than gouache would be, but I can use it to bring some light value back onto the page. So in that sense, they are a bit opaque, but I feel like, to me, it just feels like a different tool. It doesn't feel like paint. So I don't think about it as having characteristics like paint. And I don't know, I've just really been using them. This is the English red. It's a kind of earthy red. Oh, and that just made me excited. Okay, so we're going to follow that trail. Part of the idea of making watercolor my playground is doing things that I don't have a reason for, but when I see what they do and I get excited, I got to chase that. So right now I just placed this little line of English red on the paper, and it just made me really excited. There's a beautiful kind of just a soft beauty to the line that I've just created here. And I'm going to kind of use that to follow that idea and outline a little bit on my trees here. And the paper is damp in this area. It's a little bit damp over here. So we're just going to keep kind of layering a little bit of line onto this mass of the tree. I think that's going to really make my tree look, truthfully, not very local, because I feel like there's a lot more holes in my leafy area than we're seeing here. But this is my painting and I get to pursue the ideas that I'm excited about. And this is one of them. So I've done a little bit of outline with crayon right here with the Neo color, and I'm gonna mist it right here, mist it over here as well. And if you work with a spray bottle at all, you know how scary it can sometimes be to let go of marks that you've been placing on the paper. And I really feel like, to me, bringing in the spray bottle, especially when I've been doing a lot of line with these crayons, I use a lot of pressure. So I'll be, drawing that line on the page. It's a very intentional mark. It's all me, it's all my hand. And so when I come back to that mark, sorry, I feel like putting some sticks in here right now. So I'm very deliberately placing marks on the page. And so my next response to be to grab my spray bottle and to mist those. To me, there's a symbolism there. There's an invitation to watercolor to participate with me. And I love the fact that I can, that almost every time that I do something very intentional and deliberate in my painting, I come immediately back to answer it with my spray bottle and to invite that flow back in. And to me, I feel often, if this is my playground and I'm playing the game, to communicate that message to myself that says, what you're doing, the things you've just done are great, but invite watercolor to kind of reciprocate here. And it takes some of the pressure off me, that these decisions, if these marks were too bold, adding a little bit of spray will actually soften them. There's a little trickle of that English red. We're losing our outline that was here because of that moisture. It's just softly melting into the background. It's melting here as well, but still, I'm still keeping some of that line. And so I love this idea that I do something very bold and deliberate, and then I get to see watercolor respond to it. Let's put in a little bit more of that rose of ultramarine up here. It's such a pretty color. And spatter. So I did a deliberate thing, and then I did a randomness thing, an out of control thing. And those little messages are so valuable to me to remind me that this is a place to play and I don't have to do everything perfectly. So I've got all kinds of marks and texture. I could continue to maybe draw more trees in my scene. We've got all kinds of tools for getting more line in if we feel like that's necessary. But at this stage, I really want to think about the painting and let the painting kind of tell me what it wants. Be responsive to what I have here and not what I thought I was going to paint, and not what I feel like this is supposed to look like. So at this stage, it's very valuable to start thinking about this painting as having its own identity, and I'm really here to serve the painting. And as I think about that, one thing I'm thinking about is how beautiful some of these dark lines are. Some of that was the Neo color. So we could try to bring in more kind of dark tree trunks, maybe something like that. But also we have the Bloodstone, and we could bring in some more of that Bloodstone texture and create some of those beautiful darks with paint. And that's a really gorgeous line, actually. And that's an area of the painting that was mostly dry. So I'm seeing as well of some benefit in seeing color melting on wet paper, and then also seeing some crisp line coming out on dry. I have other tools that I'll often use when I start to get to the stage of painting line, creating lines in my painting. And one is this little reed pen. I can add some of that Bloodstone paint to the tip of the pen here and use it to draw some branches. It's it's a kind of a terrible pen in terms of being able to draw watercolor across the page because it runs out of color really rapidly. It often drips, and so it's really unpredictable as well. And that's actually why I love it. Again, it's me letting go of control, and I get to let the pen do its unpredictable thing. So I load it a little bit with my brush. And then I trust that I'm probably going to get a wide mark with my first stroke, so I can remember that and plan for that. But otherwise, I'm just kind of marking on the page and also kind of dragging through some of the paint that's already on the page. So I have different options that kind of happen when I bring in this very unpredictable and inconsistent little mark making tool. It's haphazard, it's unreliable. Let's put some little tree scars on my tree trunk over here. And maybe some tree scars on this tree trunk over here. And I think pairing the Bloodstone with the sepia Neocolor, I think that's a good option for getting a little bit of a variety of color quality and mark making quality. Then just seeing some of those shapes come to life. And I've been making deliberate marks for a little minute here. So what do I do if I've been deliberate for a while? I do something unpredictable. I invite some of the randomness that watercolor likes to bring. And I think in this case, I'm kind of liking the idea of bringing in a little bit of light value, because there's some areas of my painting that are getting quite dark. So this is a little bowl with some dry gouache in it. And a little bit of that gouache on my brush gives me the chance to maybe spatter some light value color, some white onto the page. I'm touching it into my tree trunk, so we're going to imagine that that's maybe some light bouncing off the tree trunk. And where the paper is wet, we're going to see that white kind of melt into the wet paper. Where the paper is dry, we might see some line popping forward. And actually, I kind of like the gouache coming across this dry paper here, over top of actually that lavender gouache we had earlier. Maybe I could grab a skinny brush and make some more really fine branches with the diluted gouache. It's worth a try. And I feel like that's the main principle. That's another principle that I love for making watercolor my playground, is that if I have an idea, I almost obligate myself to try it. Because if it may ruin my painting, it may be a crazy idea that doesn't work for this painting, but it just might teach me something that is going to benefit my future work. And at the end of the day, do I want to have one good painting, or do I want to create skills for a lifetime of, exciting and authentic and original art? I don't think I need to answer that question. I think it's pretty evident. We want to make great art. We want to do it for a long time. So, we get to have this exploration of, anything goes, anything's possible, and it's going to teach us for the next piece of work. This feels very dominant right now. So I'm looking at how what I've just done interacts with the rest of the painting. Because the gouache is very opaque, it can feel a little out of place in a transparent watercolor when you first start adding it in. And the best way to blend gouache into a transparent painting is to add more gouache. The more gouache you put on there, the more it looks like it's been there, you meant to do that, and it's been there forever. Another way is, dilute it a little bit, blend it in, let it flow a little bit, and melt it into the painting. So I'm doing that technique right here, just softening some of that white gouache, letting it kind of touch up against some of the other colors on the paper. Now I want to show you another technique, and I actually don't know that it's the best thing for this little painting, but it's something I love to share, and so why not bring it in? And that is working with stencils. I have this little envelope where I keep some of my stencils, and I think this little tree branch one actually is a great option for developing this painting further. Watercolor hasn't been traditionally a medium that people think of when it comes to working with stencils, because watercolor being fluid, if I'm trying to paint over top of a stencil, that paint, that wet paint, is usually going to seep under the stencil itself. And so you're not really going to get the effect that you would if you were working with a thicker consistency of paint. But I have learned that one thing you can do with stencils is the reverse of adding paint. You can lift paint. And so for that, I use a magic eraser microfiber sponge. I'm just going to tear a little piece off of it. And the one I have is made by Mr. Clean. It's just a kitchen household product, cleaning product, and it's a microfiber sponge. So the traditional kind of the original magic eraser, I think some of them might come with soap in them, but the original one doesn't. It's just microfiber. So it's a really fine scrubber is what it is, and it will actually lift your paint from your paper without doing too much damage to the texture of the paper itself. And so I can lay my stencil over top of my painting, and you can do this when your painting is wet or when it's dry. If your painting is wet, what you'll see is a softer effect. And when your painting's dry, you'll have a little bit more crispness in the shapes you're lifting out. So we might see some variety as I lift here. The other thing that I like to mention is that this microfiber scrubber gets dirty really quickly. So I'm lifting color, but because I'm lifting that color onto the sponge, often when I continue sponging, some of the color that gets lifted gets reapplied. And so I never get a pure white effect, but I do get the ability to kind of lift out and create some texture. This was a damp area, and so there's a softness here, but I've gotten some of my light values back. Let's work in this little area, and it's mostly dry. I'm going to try to adjust my stencil so it's in a pleasing kind of position. And I'm just going to move right down between those two tree trunks. And I'm actually going to blot just to take any excess color off. And I think you can see there's a little light now shining through and a little bit of shape that we didn't have previously. And let's carry that right across and do a little bit over here as well. Re-moisten this, rinse it out a little bit. And I have different, you can make your own stencils, you can buy stencil material and create your own. I have different patterns of stencils that I like to use as well, although this tree one gets a lot of mileage as well from me. So now I have this feeling of tree branches in a little bit of an abstracted way. I think I'm going to do a little bit over here as well. And if I just am really light with my touch here, I won't go back to white. I'll get some of those colors lifted, but I'll also see some of that original color still on the page. And so we're really seeing some different textural effects happening here. And as you try this stencil technique, pay attention to what pleases you more. Do you want something that's really soft and diffused? I can't even tell what the shape of the stencil was over here in this damp area. Over here where the paper is drier, we're seeing crisper shapes. There is a network of kind of tree branches that are happening there. And so, you know, it's a beautiful textural effect. Most of the time, whenever I'm in bringing in a technique like this, I mentioned that, you know, I'll make an intentional action, and then I'll invite the watercolor to engage with it in a more kind of organic way. And so with the stencil, it's the same thing. If I just lift out color with my stencil and then don't do anything else to kind of develop the painting further, that might feel like it kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. But if I then continue with some of the techniques that are already in the painting, maybe some of the fine lines with the bloodstone, and just layer those over top, then we start to see a little bit of a unity, harmony between what I've painted, what I've lifted. Those different techniques get unified together, and that is important to me. I love my painting to look really organic and natural. Most of the time, we don't want someone to look at our painting and go, "Oh, I can see she used, the stencil technique." Rather, we want it to feel so natural to the painting that there's very little, even you don't even notice how those different effects kind of impact each other. You just take in this beautiful painting and feel the joy of looking at something that makes you think about maybe your own experience of walking in the forest in the autumn, raking leaves for days. We got 8 inches of snow before we got our leaves raked in the yard, so we know they'll still be there for us in the spring.
And Angela, what kind of brush is that little brush you're using
This
right now? Is it a
Yeah, this little brush
yeah?
is called a dagger striper. And it's very hard. I feel like it can be hard to find little skinny fine brushes that have this kind of flick. I think this one I bought in the US 10 or 15 years ago. But I tend to always look for, some really beautiful, interesting brushes to change up my marks. One that you might have at Opus is the Da Vinci Casaneo brushes. And I like the fact that this brush, it's a rounder brush, whereas this one has kind of that dagger style. But anytime you have a brush with long bristles like this, you get a lovely organic kind of movement from that brush. And so I often, actually, some of the Japanese calligraphy brushes are really fun to work with. I have some handmade brushes that have long bristles as well. So there's, I'm the poster child for never having too many brushes, I think. Really liking, okay, I'm really excited by what's happening on my paper right now. And that is the mark making with the lines. So this little Da Vinci Casaneo, I can use, it's got a thick consistency of bloodstone on it right now and not a ton of water. And so the mark I make is going to be kind of a dry brush mark. And then maybe with the point, I can flick a little bit and get some additional lines going here as well. Some branches. And then I'm going to mist a little bit and soften some of that, just like I did over here. And I'm remembering as well that the bloodstone tends to go down darker than it dries. So I can trust that anything that feels a little bit too dominant, it might just melt into the page and create a really gorgeous, just like it's always been there, like it belongs there, like a tree in the forest. One thing I've noticed is the more time I spend on a painting, the busier that painting tends to become. Every time you add color, marks to your painting, any tools you're using, even when you're adding some gouache or opaque color, your painting, it gets more complex, and it often can get darker as well. And one thing I've really started to embrace is the idea that busy isn't bad. Having a lot going on in your painting can feel like a lot, but it can also be beautifully interesting. And I think there's this part of me as an artist that I've been thinking about how I take up space. And, it's not always just about making, to me, the most beautiful painting, but it's about really enjoying this process. And so I can keep going and just, you know, be a little too much, be a little too into it. And that's a great thing to be here in my little art studio, is so engaged in the process that, oh, I forgot to stop because I was having too much fun. And maybe my painting could have had a different kind of beauty, more simplicity kind of based beauty. But on the other hand, if I'm having just immense enjoyment in this process, this give and take of making marks, walking them back a little bit with a spray bottle, letting things flow, looking for ways to just keep going. There's a real joy in that. And I really feel like my paintings then get to, meet that purpose of letting me kind of be the artist that really loves, I really love what I do. And I have permission to do it my way. I was thinking, I wonder if a dark spot here, not that dark, but just give me a second. It would support the painting a little bit better. The kind of the lifting out that I did here was really dominating. And I think if I just put a dark shadow here, I'm going to tickle the bloodstone a little bit. But if I just kind of develop a little dark shadow here, let's put some of that lovely red violet rose of ultramarine into it too. I think that might look really nice. And it's been a little while since, it's been a minute since we did any spatter, so let's do a little bit more of that too. And every brush, if you're doing spatter, every brush will spatter differently. And I feel like the brushes with the long bristles, they get a little wild. Everything in my studio is covered in spatter. In fact, they'll often spatter backwards at you and you'll end up with it on your face. So I tend to choose a brush with a little bit of a shorter bristle for spatter because it's maybe a little easier to control. And so I'm going to spatter, then I'm going to poke a little bit. And sometimes that can help connect the spatter. How much pressure you or how hard you hit is going to be a factor on how your spatter moves across the page. The direction you point your brush, all of those different factors impact how your spatter looks. And I just had a thought. I mentioned that, I generally tend to stick within one little range of colors, but I'm really leaning toward that mention that I had of the turquoise. And just bringing in a little bit of turquoise right at this end of the painting. And I do feel like I'm kind of winding down with this. We're going to go right till 1/2 the hour though, so don't run away. I have lots more I can show you on a fresh piece of paper. So I'm just going to take this little beautiful turquoise color and just bring it into the painting in a few spots, because nothing brightens up a painting like a little pop of random color. And maybe, maybe it becomes a signature color for you. Maybe there's a color you just love and you're going to look for every opportunity to bring that into your painting. Maybe we could have turquoise branches. And I think true artistry comes from being able to ask crazy questions like that. What if all the branches were turquoise? What if I did a layer of turquoise branches right at the end of the painting? And it's, I remember years ago reading or hearing about a study that they did about imagination in kids, and how if you ask, I think if you ask adults, how many things can you do with a paper clip, they might come up with 20 ideas. But if you ask children, kindergartners, they can come up with, they start going really out of the box. They're like, what if the paperclip was 5 feet tall and made out of foam rubber? And we don't even think that. We get locked into this idea of what can be done and what is possible. But in art, making watercolor your playground, this is your place to play. your paperclip can be as big as you want it to be. Your colors can be as random as you want them to be. And your love for detail can be as extra, much too much as you want it to be. You're allowed to do all of those things. And that's what makes your art yours. And I think,
Angela,
yeah, go ahead.
can we ask a couple questions here?
Yes, that sounds like a great idea.
Okay, there's some curiosity if you ever use your stencil like a stamp when working.
There's a couple things I've tried. I actually had to this little first wash that we did. I actually had to flip it over because it had stencil stuff on the first side of the paper. Because I'm always trying different things to do with my stencils. One thing I've noticed is that if you take your stencil onto a wet wash and just lay it down on there, what the stencil will do is it'll actually attract the wet paint so that you'll actually get kind of a darker line everywhere the stencil is touching that wash. So it's just interesting that leaving the stencil onto a wet wash and letting it dry will give you the dark outline of that stencil. And that's an interesting thing to try. I haven't really tried stamping with the stencil, although there are I'm often intrigued by the idea of working with printmaking techniques. And if you've done any printmaking and you're watching this today, you're probably getting ideas. I had a friend tell me she's a printer, and she says that you have the soul of a printer, Angela, because I do love this idea of taking a tool and finding a way to make further marks on the paper. But with watercolor, we know that watercolor and the plastic of a stencil, the watercolor wants to kind of beat up on that. And so we have to kind of find ways to compensate or work around that. And the stamping with the stencil, not as much, although sometimes, I shouldn't say that. Sometimes I do, because I've been thinking about it. Sometimes your stencil will be lying on the paper here where it's wet. And when you pick it up, you've got paint on it. And it's really fun to lay that somewhere else and see the marks from that paint be applied to your paper. So yeah, I guess the answer is yes. I just wasn't really paying attention. Maybe I was too busy in the experimentation process.
I like that suggestion with the
Mhm.
stencil, how different ways that you use it. It's really creative.
Yeah.
There's also like a couple questions about your process and materials. You at one point you chose to use the white gouache, and there's a
Mhm.
few folks here kind of, why did you choose the white gouache versus a white neocolor? And could you have achieved a similar result if you had used the neocolor crayon?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question. I think like I actually don't. Oh, I do have a white neocolor. I haven't used it very much yet. With the gouache, the neocolor, sometimes what I've found is it's a little bit unreliable. Maybe if I'd wet it, I could have drawn some lines on here. But with the gouache, I have the opportunity to work with the consistency of paint. So for me, I think I do compartmentalize a little bit that the crayons are a mark making tool. You see a lot of marks on the page because I've been using them as a mark making tool. When it comes to areas where I want to see maybe an area covered, or the opportunity to lay a shape down with my gouache and then maybe dilute it in some areas or expand it or feather it out. Those are all things I do better with paint than I would with a crayon.
Thank you for that. And
Yeah.
also just one more question here, and that is, could you please let us know the colors of neo crayons that you chose for today's painting?
Yeah, what have I got here? So and there was this one too. Mostly I've worked with the turquoise green was the last one I just did. And I like the vividness of it on this paper. The sepia is the very first neocolor I bought. And so you can actually see they last a really long time because it's not very much shorter than the other colors I have. And so sepia, yeah. And then the golden ochre, which I would say is kind of a raw sienna. I did bring in this Sahara yellow as well, although it's not showing up very much. It's mostly melted into the wash. There's a few little dots of bright pigment there. And it's just a soft yellow. And then the English red was the other one I had. You can buy beautiful, huge sets of the Neo colors in tins. It might be more cost effective, but I really enjoyed kind of bringing in one or two at a time. And that tends to be the way I work with color. If I'm buying new tubes of paint, I tend to buy them one or two at a time as well, because I feel like I get overwhelmed by choice when I have a whole bunch of new colors. It tends to, be just you have too many colors that you have to then learn how they work in a painting. So I want to have new products so that I can have kind of that fresh excitement over, ooh, what's this going to do? But I also want to have some ability to kind of learn and predict what's going to happen. So there's a little bit of both of those strategies going on. I'm just going to spatter a little bit of the Aussie red gold and bring some of that warm color back into the painting. It was the first color I chose when we started painting today. And usually the first color you choose kind of gets a little bit lost as you start adding other hues. And so it's nice at the end of a painting or towards the end to go in and maybe bring in some of that additional vibrance right back into the painting here. So I would say this is the way to I have to be careful how I say this, the much too much version. And I love saying that it's too much and too busy, because that's something that I used to think of as a criticism. I would look at my painting and say, it's too whatever. And now I know that whenever I tell myself something is too something, I can be a little bit rebellious about that. And I can say, maybe it is too busy, but I actually love the energy those marks bring. I love the fact that there's a lot to look at. I love the way that even though I have a whole lot of those pale turquoise marks, they actually move you through the middle of the painting in a really beautiful way. And so too much, too busy, it doesn't have to be a condemnation or a judgment on the painting. Rather, it gets to be maybe just a quality that maybe I'm too much, and that's okay too. And so I get to take joy in that. And I just think that's been a really fun part of this artistic journey, is instead of thinking, oh, it's too something, and in that way it's broken the rules, it doesn't fit in, it's failed. I get to actually celebrate that fact that there's, too much happening here. I want to show you one other way of kind of approaching this, and it's going to be quick because we don't have a ton of time. And if you have questions, I want you to don't miss out on having the chance to ask them. So, be putting those into the chat. But I want to just rapidly show you another way of approaching this this playful practice. And that is, I mentioned that for years I didn't sketch with a pencil before I started painting. And now I do actually use sketching, but I use it to give me, what did I say, that kind of mental cue that I'm allowed to do whatever I want. This is my painting, and let's play. And one way I do that, let me find a fun color here. Start with this pink. One way I do that is to use my sketching as an opportunity to remind me that I'm in this silly exercise, this silly life of making pictures of things I could just walk out of my house and go see. I'm in the process of, I'm in this frivolous pursuit of making art just because I love to do it, whether or not it goes anywhere or, serves any purpose beyond that. And so I can then start a painting with that reminder that this is playful, and maybe even a little bit silly. So I've just drawn my tree, my band of grasses, and hinted at other stuff going on over here. And this makes me think of 3-year-old me, 5-year-old me, who could dash off a drawing in seconds and then confidently say, look at my airplane, look at my turtle that I just drew, and it be as simple as a scribble. And I love the fact that maybe we can I can make my painting kind of low hanging fruit that way. Maybe it gets to be that reminder that, when I was a little girl making art and saying confidently, here's a painting, here's a drawing. That was a great way to approach this whole process of making art. And I can learn from that. And what happens is when I start with the little scribble to kind of say, okay, this is where everything's going to go. There's a lot of freedom inside of a scribble that there isn't inside of a more controlled drawing. So if you are feeling like you need to draw, you've always used a pencil to draw on your paintings, starting with a scribble like this is a really good way to kind of remind yourself or to transition away from that kind of feeling that everything needs to be spelled out. Maybe you get to instead have a little more openness in your painting. And let's stick with some of the colors we started with early on. I'm gonna just see what we can do in just a couple minutes. And then you get to see the simplified maybe version rather than the much too much version. And maybe see them both. And I want to just mention as well that for me, my process is pretty immediate. Most of the time, I want to be able to have this feeling that a painting can be started and finished in one session. There's a lot of freshness that comes with that. This time I'm also going to leave some white space, some crisp white space, so you can see these little holes where that color is popping through. My Aussie red gold in my palette is starting to get to the bottom, so I have a little bit more granular color in the bottom there. And it's got a little textural effect right here that's kind of pretty. And I want you to notice as well, and this is a watercolor characteristic, where are all the light values? Where's the light shining through in this painting? And that is, and the light is shining through anywhere the color is diluted or anywhere we haven't placed any paint yet, anywhere we have the white of the paper. And truthfully, in terms of how beautiful just the simplest things can be, is that maybe we don't need to go a lot further than this to create a painting that pleases us. Right now I have a little edge right here where there's dry paper. You can see that little hole. If I touch in some bloodstone and just follow that hole, maybe that's enough to create my tree trunk. Just like that. And we'll use a skinny brush or maybe we'll use this thing to just drag through here. See if we can't pull some color with it. And I'm actually going to poke it right into my bloodstone. So I've got a little globby bit of paint on the tip of the reed pen. And those two little branches kind of look like soldiers in a row. So I'm going to kind of try to make them a little more interesting by pulling away from them and changing up that shape a little bit. Let's just drag up through here as well. I still got paint on my pen, so I might as well use it all. Bring in a little scribble. A little inner cue. Just that, whenever I have this little tool and I've used it, but I still have a little paint on it, and then I do something like a scribble like that. What you're seeing is I'm sending a message to myself, just that little freedom message that I need to remind me that, this is just a game. This is just me playing with paint because I get to, because this is the beautiful joy of making art, is we started painting because we wanted to, because something in us wanted to make art and we made that choice. So we get to celebrate that every time we pick up a brush. A little bit more of the beautiful red gold. Let's put some more of that in. just right there. Let's spatter a little bit too. And I think it's pretty beautiful how already we see our tree. Already it says some really nice things about watercolor. And we can go a little bit further yet. Let's see. There's that lovely red violet, which we know is a lovely kind of shadow color for partnering with the red gold. Let's spatter it too. This is that flicky brush, so it's going to get everywhere. Maybe a little bit over here too. We had some raw sienna. Let's put a landscape in with a line. The simplest of landscapes, single line. And well, let's maybe drag through it a little bit just to maybe suggest some grasses, a little scribble. And then what do we want to do next? And I like to think about the fact that I don't have to do anything. There's no obligation to take this further. I can call it finished in this simple form. And sometimes I need that. Sometimes I need to be able to walk away and come back and say, you know, what I created in 5 minutes is really beautiful. Maybe I need that reminder so that I can put on the brakes next time I'm trying to overcompensate in a painting and do too much. Maybe I want to enjoy the beautiful interaction between the red gold as it flows up against this bloodstone, up against this lavender, and the effect it's creating there. Maybe I want to notice the way I have this dribble of water creating a tree trunk here and how beautiful that is. And you know, just celebrate this beautiful medium. I have spent a lot of years feeling like I am one bad decision away from ruining my painting at any given moment. And to come now at this stage, you know, is having persisted in watercolor for nearly 30 years, and now say, I give myself permission to be silly here, and to just, yeah, open things up to no idea being too crazy. That's been just the most fun and freeing for me. I really don't want to do too much more. So just looking for little ways to bring in maybe a little bit of line that, you know, isn't going to demand a lot of attention in the painting, but maybe support this sense of this tree here. I'm tempted to maybe pull out a few more branches. You know, you can drag with a little fine pointed brush, the dagger striper. Sometimes my brush, it's too structured even. Sometimes I go with the hardware store brush. This little guy, I bought it for 99 cents at the clearance bin at the hardware store. It's literally a brush you would find in the paint section. But when I use it to flick out marks, that actually can make some really nice fine tree branches. It can make some really nice texture on my tree trunk. And it looks less like the control that I'm seeing in these fine marks here. One of the reasons I talk about wanting watercolor to feel like my playground is because when we make it serious business, we make the mistakes feel a lot more important. So this is that reminder that when my painting looks like I've been trying really hard, it doesn't usually do my painting any favors. I'm much better off with this beautiful freedom of playful color, playful mark making. Nobody's going to look at this and say, these branches over here don't actually physically touch the tree trunk. That's not real. We don't see that. That's not the effect we end up with. Instead, people feel the wind in the trees. They sense that freedom that we approach the painting with. And that's a really joyful way to paint. It's a joyful thing to communicate to others as well. We got a couple more minutes. I'll take your questions again, and maybe I'll bring that painting forward as well. The one we just finished. We can take a look at between the two. There's a little part of me that feels like it would be really fun to draw all my distant trees with this pink neocolor. I don't know if we're going to go that far, but I'm just doing a couple of vertical lines to indulge that kind of instinct. And let's make some room and take a look at these two different paintings side by side. If you're a frugal painter, this might be hard for you to think about, doing a painting that you can finish in half an hour, doing a painting where you can take a lot of risks and maybe be a bit extra. I want to encourage you to think about the backsides of your unsatisfactory paintings as a place where you can give yourself permission to push your boundaries and be playful. The best thing for your art is that you continue to expand your boundaries of what you're able to do. And we don't do that if we are always hesitating and worried about going too far. So when you push your boundaries, when you overdo it, when you get too crazy, too bold, too sloppy, too many mistakes, all of those are learning opportunities for you as an artist, to be able to feel like this is a game, involves you needing to give yourself permission to play. And I would just encourage you to do that.
I love it, Angela. So inspiring. We do have a couple questions here.
Yep.
One of them is from Sue, and she's wondering if you feel like you accomplished what the photo inspired in you.
No. That's a great question. And the answer is no, because I don't think I could ever feel like I've said all the things. As I look at these paintings, all I can tell is one little piece of a story. And then I also get surprised sometimes by the mood that comes out. So we have different kinds of energy being communicated in these paintings. And I come, if I'm walking through the forest, I come through with all different kinds of emotions. So it's as changeable as the wind, and it's never done. That's, I guess I come at it like we look at a different sunset every day, and we're there for the next one the next day. It's an ongoing process. So I don't, yeah, I really try not to set a boundary of what I want my painting to do for me. I want to pour as much joy and love into the process as I can and make that the goal. And then I love the idea of being obsessed with an idea enough to paint it many, many times.
I love that. Well, you've definitely, as watercolors as your playground, you have shown us how to approach them in such a playful way, Angela. There's some really sweet comments here in the chat. I'll read this one out for you from Carol Farrow. She's written, or they've written, the simple painting speaks to my soul because it gives me the freedom to interpret what I want from it.
Yeah, that I think is the ultimate message that I would love to communicate today. I just pulled out one more painting that was actually painted on location, and I just wanted to share that as well. I don't know that I could, this freedom here and that being in the moment and on location was a pretty special part of that process as well. So, being able to look at something from many directions and see just how much you can communicate through all of these different pursuits. To me, that's really valuable. It's very freeing.
Love it. Gorgeous.
I just want to thank everyone for being here today. It's such a privilege to share these things that have felt so freeing for me. And most of the time I think about, when I think about you and what you might be struggling with in your studio, to me, I look back and I think about all the fears that I had that, I made a mistake on my painting, and once again, I've failed, and it somehow it was somehow me, being so anxious as to think I could actually make something good or create with the kind of joy I hope to feel. And my hope is that seeing this idea of experimentation and play and making room for it really helps you to embrace the artist you really are, rather than feeling like you have to meet some kind of expectation or obligation. There is a real freedom in just falling in love with the process.
I love that. So inspiring. Thank you for inspiring us to be more playful in our art practice and just your way of highlighting what it means to be a creative person and kind of the creative ways you have at looking at art and the process of art making. So from the bottom of our hearts, I'd like to thank you for being here with us today, Angela, and everyone just for participating and being part of the community. Thank you so much. And I do hope to see everyone again sometime in the future. And I'll be sure you get this little love blast in the chat.
Thank you.
Enjoy the
Bye.